welcome to Moving Forward, a podcast by Good Habits. I'm your host, Amy Clark. In this podcast, we make sure you get all the insights you need to build a high-performing learning culture to future-proof your organization. Whether you're an HR professional, a learning and development manager, or anyone looking to give your team a leg up, you'll learn the trends and tricks to get your people learning and moving forward. In each episode, we invite an expert or two to unpack some key statements designed to get them sharing their best insights. In this episode, we're exploring authentic leadership. What does it mean to be authentic? Can authenticity be developed? And how does it shape your approach to leadership? To help me unpack this, I'd like to welcome Anne and Chrissy to the table. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
To start off, please introduce yourselves and tell me why you're here. And I'm going to start with you, Anne.
Thank you so much. I'm Anne Koopman, and I'm here because originally I'm an engineer, and I actually have a career back in the rail and manufacturing industry, where I had a steep leadership career and worked internationally, worldwide, and at the end I was head of quality for Australia and Southeast Asia. So I was managing lots of different teams and big rail projects. And now, since almost 6 years, I actually have my own business, and I work in leadership development and team development. And my business is called Lead Like You, which is kind of the foundation of authentic leadership and the idea that, you can lead successfully if you know who you are and what you stand for as a leader.
Oh, you're making me very excited to just unpack all the topics we have to discuss today. But before I get there, Chrissy, tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Chrissy. I'm head of customer success at Good Habits. And when I heard about the topic of authentic leadership, it really caught my attention because this is actually what I've been passionate about for years. And within Good Habits, I've had the option to really lead a lot of teams, grow a lot of teams, get some experience and really turn into a transformative leader. So I'm very happy to also hear from both of you, your opinions on authentic leadership, and of course, share my experience here.
Awesome. Great. Okay, well, let's kick off then without further ado. Our first statement, which I'd like you to weigh in on, is authenticity is a trait, not a skill. I'm going to kick off with you. What do you think about that one?
Very interesting. So I think it's kind of a little bit of both. So I think at the baseline of authentic leadership, it's kind of who we are, right? The core of what we stand for, our strength, and kind of the person that we want to be. But I think to show up as our authentic self, I think there's a few skills that you can learn along the way and support that you can get to really tap into understanding your values, understanding your strength, and also develop the emotional intelligence that needs to come with it to build the trust as an authentic leader.
Okay, so a bit of both. And what's been your experience? And would you consider yourself an authentic leader?
Now, absolutely yes, to answer this question first. But I've been a leader also. I was a leader in the past 10 years ago at my former employer. And at that moment, I didn't know about authentic leadership and I didn't even dare to be authentic. And I grew up in patterns where I thought I need to be like the idea of a leader that I had in mind. And I really failed at that moment. So I thought I'm never, ever going to lead people again. In my life at Good Habits, I got this chance again, which is amazing because I was older, of course. I got my experience. I had some other role models that I had in mind that inspired me. So I understood being myself, being authentic will not only get me further, but also will make my teams grow, will let us reach goals. And that was actually my path. And to me, it is not necessarily a skill, but for everybody, it needs something to be authentic and true to yourself, to stick to your values. And I think for a lot of people, for me, it took a lot of courage. So I had to learn to be brave enough to speak up for myself, say what I think, even though it might be different from what others expect me to say.
Brilliant answer, because what I'm hearing is it's not really a trait in the fact that maybe it doesn't always come naturally to you at first, or you have a different idea of what is expected as a leader. Once you understand the importance of it, I suppose the thing that you need to unpack to become authentic will be different for everybody. So maybe you can give me some examples. You mentioned emotional intelligence. What other aspects are there to being authentic? What does it really mean to be authentic?
Yeah, I think let's go back a little bit, because I think one important thing to understand is why it's so powerful to be authentic. Bill George, who is an executive fellow of Harvard University, he actually wrote 2 books on authentic leadership that kind of brought it onto the map, I think, in the early 2000s. And he kind of says there's to build and lead effective teams, you kind of need to build trust. And that's kind of the essence of if you want to be a good and successful leader. And so building trust, how do you do that? By showing up as your authentic self, so that your people that you lead actually understand who you are and also can trust that the way you show up today will be similar to the way that you show up tomorrow. And so I think that's important to understand, that we want to build trust. We don't just want to be authentic for some reason, and we don't want to orchestrate some kind of version of ourselves that we are not. And so I think, and then it comes back down to when I know, okay, I want to be authentic. I think what's really important is to look at our values. What do we stand for? What's important to us? And really understand the 2-3 core values that we want to live by and lead by. And then understand how does that translate into behaviors so that it doesn't become just like something nice to have that, put on a poster, for example. And you're like, okay, if my value is courage, how do I show courage every single day in the way I give feedback, the way I speak to my people? And especially it comes down to how do I show up in difficult times when the pressure is high. So, because that's, I think, when we see often cultures fail or leaders struggle is when, they show up as a certain version and they say, this is my core value and this is the kind of leader I am. And then if there's external pressures or things happen in the world, suddenly they, jump ship and suddenly they let go of certain initiatives that they said they were so behind and suddenly they're not. That's when trust is lost. So understanding your core values and then being prepared to really live by them. Every single day.
And that can be very tough.
Yeah, it's tough. It is tough.
And very intentional. And I'm hearing, so it starts with values and values impact behavior. How do we go about creating an environment at a workplace where people have the space to be authentic and to practice being authentic leaders? I mean, maybe what was your experience? What was it for you that made you feel that you could be more authentic as a leader?
Actually, exactly what Ant just mentioned. It's the matter of trust. So when I restarted to be a leader, I had 2 people around me already that then became my team. And we had 100% trust because we've known each other for a long time already. And we were really one for all and all for one, that kind of crew. And then it was easy for me also to show vulnerability, to try things, to tell them, hey guys, for the company goal, we need to do X, Y, Z. My approach would be the following. What do you think? Can we do that? Yeah, let's try. Okay. And this was how I also understood more and more what leadership means to me, how I can do that. And of course, then there was a moment where we had to hire new people because our business grew bigger and bigger. And that was then also a team decision. So for me, it was building an environment of trust, but also listening to the people around me, how they feel about it, always having the company goal in mind, but show empathy and genuine interest in what they need, and then on how we can get successful together. So for me, it was always like a little bit of a prima inter pares. Not sure if that makes sense in English, but I never saw me as the person that knows everything and has an answer to everything. I see myself as the person that is brave enough to try new things at first, to discover new areas, to think outside the box, and to make it in a way that it's comfortable for everybody and that everybody with their own fears feels safe enough to do this together.
Yeah. Safety seems like a huge part of all of this. And it's kind of a vicious cycle because you need the safe environment to show up authentically, I think, but you also then create the safe environment in the process. So you work with a lot of organizations. So what do you advise them on helping them encourage their leaders in that way?
Yeah, I think it starts with the leader, right, to create that environment even if they don't feel safe. I think that's where it starts with. As a leader, you have to have the courage to step in, and especially if you are like back then in my organization where I worked, it was not a safe environment to really show up authentically, and you kind of have to figure out for yourself, how do I want to lead? And if you know that that's who you want to be, you got to be brave enough to start. And then what I think is really helpful, what I do with a lot of organizations, is to do the value-based work. But most importantly, I do strengths-based work. So we look to build the confidence of the leaders, right? So we look at their strengths profile to really understand who they naturally are, how they think, how they look at problems, how they communicate, how they build relationships. Because especially when we step into leadership, there's a lot of imposter syndrome, or we feel a bit insecure about how we should act, what we should do. And leadership is hard, right? So, confidence is a key factor. And I think when you know your strength and you learn to understand that's what I'm really good at, here are areas that don't come naturally to me, it also makes it easier to show up with that and kind of to show up with your weaknesses and be like, hey, I know I have some really cool strengths. I also know I have things I don't do well. And then you can talk about it. And by talking about your weaknesses or being vulnerable, you mentioned that before, right? By being vulnerable, by showing up as yourself, you're opening the floor for everyone else to be vulnerable and to show their weaknesses and to be like, okay, I don't have to be perfect. And so you can talk about your mistakes. You can talk about things that, you find tricky. And that way you're opening up the door to slowly allow others to show up as their authentic self as well.
And where does the intersection come with authenticity and transparency? Because I feel like sometimes they get used interchangeably and I don't know where the line is.
Yeah. It's a tricky one. I think as a leader, you do have to decide. So I think leadership, it's a myth, right? That if you're an authentic leader, you have to be bluntly honest all the time and be transparent about everything. That's, I think, where emotional intelligence comes into play. And I think that's where, authenticity can only work or be successful when you have character strength and have integrity and emotional intelligence. So you need to have a real interest in the people that you work with. Because if you're just bluntly honest and if you're just interested in your own self, even showing up as authentic, as your authentic self won't build trust, right? Because if you're just there for your own advantage, people will realize at some point. So if you want to build trust, we got to figure out also, okay, I want to show up, but what's the situation? What are the people? Use your empathy, understand what do they need from me right now? And also, of course, your responsibility towards your organization. Because sometimes we can't share all the facts. Sometimes we also can't be too vulnerable, right? If there's a very stressful situation that's scary for us, then we can't show all of our fears to the people that we lead because we will make them feel a bit more insecure. So sometimes you got to be a little bit, choose a little bit how you show up and how transparent you are.
Strategic, I think.
Yeah, strategically, and what matches the situation. And that doesn't mean that you're inauthentic, because you can still stay true to your values, right? And still be open with the people and show up as yourself and approach the situations that are true to your in your values. But it does mean you have to be careful. You can't always be transparent as a leader, like fully transparent. Depends on the situation.
Okay, yeah, I think that's the responsibility of leadership, isn't it? I mean, you do have this very careful balance between sharing information and being responsible with the way you communicate, which is, I think, something that every leader needs to work on. With that, I'm going to move on to our next statement, and that is, the leaders of the future are kind. Chrissy, I'm going to give this one to you.
Hopefully not only the leaders of the future, but the leaders already in the present. I do think that you need kindness, of course, and empathy and all this. And at the same time, you might want to have some achievements in your business goals. So I think with everything in life, this is about balance. You cannot be only empathetic for your people. You also need to understand how to move forward with them. And sometimes that also means that you have to say no to your team and say, okay, I understand why you need this or you want this or why you feel how you feel. But please, now we need to also get back to professionalism, put it aside. Let's find a way how you can put it aside, and then let's move on. So I think it's not only the leaders of the future that need to be kind. I really hope that there are a lot of leaders out there who actually already are kind.
Well, I really hope so. And interestingly, I recently had the real honor of diving into this topic, reading a book called The Value of Kind Leadership. And it digs into, obviously the value of kindness and the returns that it brings. But there's this misunderstanding that being kind is being nice. And I think it's really actually the hard conversations can also be kind. What's been your experience with kindness in leadership?
Yeah, I think there's this misconception that you say, right? Like kindness doesn't mean you're ineffective. I think a lot of leaders that I work with, or sometimes, and often females, they're like, oh yeah, I've been told I'm too nice to be a leader. And I'm like, yeah, but you're confusing nice with being kind and being effective. You can still be kind and effective as a leader. I think kindness comes and is closely connected to empathy. And I think leaders need that. And at the same time, you got to be effective. Like you said, think about the goals that we need to achieve. And as Brené Brown says, right, clear is kind. So providing feedback, making difficult conversation is also part of leadership. And I think kindness is important, and it doesn't stand against being effective and successful as a leader, and also having tough conversations.
And I really like this part that you just mentioned, because being nice is not necessarily being kind, because if you have an environment of trust, then somebody needs to tell you what you're doing wrong or what you could do better. And if you cannot rely on your leader that he's the one who tells you where you can get better, whom can you trust then? And this is why I also think leaders shouldn't necessarily be nice. So and kind can also be like being honest and being very open with somebody. And I've experienced this already in the past, and I got great feedback afterwards. Not necessarily in the conversation, but a week later, people came to me and were like, thanks that you told me, because nobody else told me
hard
before.
To hear, but appreciate it. Yeah. You know what I keep hearing is that bravery is a huge part of this. At first, being authentic, continuing to be authentic, being transparent, not being, being strategic. It just seems like that's a tough skill. But I mean, how do you even learn to be brave? I don't know. Like, what can learning and development professionals do to help people in their companies take the step? Do you have any insights?
Yeah, I think, it comes down to really building that confidence. And I think, and opening the conversations. I think you mentioned that before, that if we don't see authentic leaders or courageous leaders in the workplace, then we don't really see that that's possible, that that's a thing. Like you said at the start, I didn't even know about authentic leadership. So I think it really starts by telling people about leadership and modern leadership and, leadership with kindness, with empathy, psychological safety, like all of these things, to really educate them that that's also, that you can find your own way in leadership and you don't have to be like the leaders left, right, center, or the leaders that you kind of grew up with in your career. I think the awareness around that, and then helping people be self-aware, exploring their strengths, understanding what they stand for, who they are, and then giving them opportunities to kind of step out a little bit out of their comfort zone. Often leaders and emerging leaders get just thrown in, and that's what happened to me, right? You're like
And
thrown
me.
in and you're like, oops, yes, there you go, right? And that feels super scary. And then that's when you then look at other people and you try to copy them. And you're like, for me, that was the case. I was copying people around me, and I was like, in a male-dominated environment, and I was like, that doesn't feel like me. I don't know how I fit, and I really struggled with my confidence. And when I then invested a bit more in my strength, and I started to see that I have something to offer that's different, I kind of dared to show up with that a bit more. And then you learn, you have some positive moments, and you're like, okay, cool, I'm on the right track here, because I can be like who I really am, and I have something to offer that's worth showing, and I can be a leader even if I'm different. And I think that's what you can really invest in.
It sounds like awareness around the fact that your leadership style is very much within your control and can be something that you kind of create and build as you go, and B, just to sort of, this copycat thing it really sticks with me, because we learn by seeing. We've heard so many leadership styles. I don't know, you could probably mention a couple off the top of your head. There's authentic leadership, of course, and there's transformational leadership, and then there's servant leadership and all these things. What do you see as like the one thing that somebody can do to just cut across all of that?
The one thing. So when Ange was just talking, she said something, it didn't feel right to me. And what I learned for myself, and I don't know how to say it better. I really thought about it as prep for this podcast. It's like, for me, the compass became, I feel this. So if I think about doing something brave, or, I don't know, outstepping my comfort zone, I'll do it when it feels right. Not when I think it is right, but when it feels right, then I know, okay, this is my compass, or this is my path to go. And I think if you follow your own intuition, then this can be the way how you break through all those different styles, and how you can develop your own style, because I'm an actual kind of overthinking person. So I will always think about every angle, every effect that could have, and this will make it hard to take fast decisions. But then I learned over the last years, where thankfully had an environment of safety to grow this skill, I learned that I can't just follow like, okay, does this feel right? Yes or no. If it doesn't feel right, I'm not going to do it.
I love that.
And there were a lot of mistakes I did, and every time I was convinced, I did not what felt right. I did what I thought I should do, and that was wrong.
You know, I've definitely been in it, now that you mention it, where your intuition's like, this doesn't feel like the way that it needs to be. And I think, again, this comes back to, it's reflection, it's getting to know yourself, it's self-awareness. And that's a difficult journey. But I would encourage organizations to, when they put people in leadership positions, to just have some kind of process where they are encouraged to think about these things for themselves, at the very least, I guess, the personal values, which we've talked about before. Want to add to the leadership style conversation, because I think I like to think of it as more situational leadership. Because I think we are way too complex as humans to kind of try and put us in a box and say, I'm this, that's my leadership style, that's my leadership style. I think look at how your values, look at your strength, start to understand where your natural capabilities are, how you see the world, how you like to operate, and then think about the different situations that you might find yourself in. Because some situations will need you to be a bit more in command, a bit more with authority, because you just have to make tough decisions. So then think about, okay, how can I, from my values and my strength, help myself be a little bit more tougher in these situations. Then there might be situations where you can be more like a coach. But I think, and then how can you use your strength, and how can you approach this in your own unique way, but kind of adapt it to the situation at hand. I think that's like situational leadership, I think, is really important, because it allows you to be flexible to whatever the environment, the situation, and the person in front of you needs, right? I'm so glad you bring this up, because I was just about to ask about how this would work across industries. I mean, you had a whole industry change yourself, but I think you've already answered that question. being able to be flexible in your leadership approach with your values as your compass sounds like that's sort of the answer. And it just takes a bit of trial and error, I suppose, as well as you find your feet. With that, I think it's time to lead to the third statement of the section, which is leading effectively can only be accomplished by continuous growth. You first.
Amen.
Yes, not done enough, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a human being, we should grow ourselves consistently. And I always compare this to plants. Have you ever seen a tree that stops growing? They will die. I know this is a heavy picture, but in the end, this is about being a human. And if you want to be an inspirational leader, or if you want to move people forward or help people grow, then you also first you need to grow yourself. Reflect on yourself, on your experiences, but of course also get in new input that you then can use to make the world a better place if you want to have it in a big way, but also to move forward with you and for your teams, and also help your teams to develop themselves.
Yeah, because also you're a role model for them, and if you want them to grow, you should also model that behavior yourself. Funny enough, just last week I was on the phone to my mom, and she's been a leader in a sort of very executive role for years. And I asked her about her learning habits because, of course, I'm interested. I'm making content for people like her. And she just is a lifelong learner, never stops learning, and she's been a leader for 20 years. And you'd think that kind of could sound rigid and boring. And how can you do the same thing for 20 years? But she just said every year it's been something different, something new to uncover. What's your take on this continuous improvement for leaders?
Yeah, funnily enough, I was actually working as a manager for continuous improvement as well. So kind of, everything is kind of transferable, right? When you think about it. I think it's so true because we as leaders, there's so many facets of what we can learn and invest in, right? And there's so many skills we can learn and capacities, competencies. But I also think you meet new people all the time, and people are so complex. So as we know, off air, we kind of all talked about our experience of starting with a small team where we kind of knew the people, or we might maybe worked with them before as a peer, or we got to select them and to hire them. And then, when you take over a new department or a bigger department, suddenly you haven't hired them, you don't know them well. So suddenly it becomes so complex because you really have to figure out who are all these people, where do they come from, what do they want, how do they work, how do they operate. So I think even that alone is so much learning that will never stop. And that will, if you just reflect on these situations, that will trigger things for you to okay, I could invest in, looking at feedback conversations again, or learning, how to do performance reviews better. I think there's so many little topics that you can look at just from that perspective.
Yeah, it's never ending. You just pull a thread and just unravel. Actually, I wanted to ask you, Chrissy, because you mentioned earlier that you manage quite a huge team. You have a huge amount of direct reports, if I think about it, like 19 people or something.
Yeah.
What has been something that you've had to learn recently to really be that leader for them?
Recently, that's a good one. Recently, I had to learn time management and not drown in operations, but have the headspace to think about things, thinking strategic, and grow myself, to have something to inspire the teams with, and also to give them the impression and the trust that I know what we're doing, that I know where we go, and that they can trustfully follow, because we're currently in a moment of a lot of changes going on. And this is great. And at the same time, as a leader, you need to be a little bit ahead of your team so that they know, okay, there is somebody who knows what we're doing, and she's going the way with us and a little bit for us. And that was actually my biggest learning moment, especially in the past year, where I had to manage nearly 20 instead of 10 people.
Yeah.
So that is a lot of time management, and also saying no and sorting things and stepping up in your role, and that you're not only taking responsibility, but also being aware that now you're not this person anymore that does all the operational things on top, but now you have responsibility for 20 people, and you really need to make time for this, and you need to delegate even stronger and make sure that people who do things for you are empowered to do so, and that they can work on their own, and you get some space and time to take care for leading, but also managing this big team, of course.
So basically, become a superwoman, and then
Kind of.
You struck something that had me thinking, and this is also kind of relates back to that authenticity we were talking about earlier. The transparency. When an authentic leader is dealing with a decision that they need to implement that clashes with their values, what do you do?
That's a tricky one. And I think most leaders find themselves in a situation at some point, right, where the organization decides something that they might not agree with, or that clashes with their values, I think you really have to step back and think about what triggers you, manage your own emotion around it first. And that's where emotional intelligence comes back in, right? Really understanding what's going on for you and then making a decision, right? How can you find some kind of connection of the outcome that's about to happen that will align with your values again, right? So figuring out, okay, can you see maybe, this decision feels tricky for you, but maybe the outcome is something that can connect to what you might stand for and want to stand for. And I think sometimes as leaders, and then of course, sometimes you have to make the decision it doesn't align, but I think that's a bit extreme because often it will happen all the time in leadership roles that something will happen and you're like, that doesn't quite align. So you need to figure out to be okay with that. But I think even when you have to then translate these difficult decisions down, that's often where, that's the hardest part of leaders. Like somebody up top makes hard decisions and the ones who actually have to deal with the people, deal with the emotions are then, the lower or middle management. You have to really... you can still use your values in delivering this message. So I think that's where you can really make a mark. So I often advise the people that I work with to be like, okay, you might not like what's going to happen, but now is your time to actually shine and make a difference, because how you treat people in this time, how you lead and guide them through this change can really make a huge difference in their life and how they feel at the end of it and if they come out of it. So I think, yes, big decisions we can't always influence, but what is it that you have in control? Focus on your circle of control and then let your values go into that and then treat people or guide them along the way based on that. And that's how you can find your connection again, I think.
Brilliant answer. You've mentioned quite a few things that I just would love to unravel. Circle of control is one of them that I also spent a lot of time focusing on. For those listeners who maybe aren't aware, it's really like, there are things you can influence, like your behavior or whatever. There are things the things you can control, things you can influence the other people's behavior maybe, and things that are really out of your control, like, I don't know, the weather, or in this case, maybe a management decision. Staying in that circle of control and maybe spending a bit of time in the influence can be good. So definitely a helpful tool. But the other thing you've mentioned a few times is emotional intelligence. So what does that really mean? And what can people do to improve that?
Luckily, it's a skill that you can learn as well. And some people, of course, have naturally more strengths that align with emotional intelligence. But emotional intelligence means it's kind of two components, or let's say three. One is that you are very aware of who you are and also your emotions and your emotional triggers. So, self-awareness and also self-regulation is really important here. That we are aware of, we all feel many different things throughout just minutes sometimes. And it's just understanding how our emotions influence and impact our behaviors so that we're not driven by our emotions, because that can sometimes lead to these situations where afterwards we're like, oh no, I should have not said that. I shouldn't have done that. Just knowing when you're more driven by emotions and then just take a beat. Take a breath. And so that's like self-awareness, self-regulation. Then a big part of emotional intelligence is, of course, empathy and your relationship and your social skills. So understanding other people's emotions and understanding their cues and their triggers and starting to see, okay, how do my behaviors impact how they feel and how they act? And then a third component is kind of your environment, the awareness of what's going on in like a culture or like an environment, and having a bit of like a sensitivity to understanding what's going on around us. So that's kind of the components there.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's a very comprehensive answer. And I think, again, this emotional intelligence also comes through to that responsibility of leading people, and you have what you do and how you act and behave really does impact people, and that's a huge responsibility. Chrissy, what's been your experience? Have you had some wins or some blunders regarding emotional intelligence, regulation, that kind of thing, where you feel like you've...
Well, I'd say in my beginnings as a leader, I really learned that just because I think things are a no-brainer, people don't have the same feelings about, or that even though I try to really adapt to other people's feelings and behavior, that I still step on toes and I even don't realize. So for me, that was kind of actually a moment where I started to really self-reflect, like how do other people tick, like what's heavy for them, what's important to them, what emotions do they show and what emotions they might not show to me. So really be kind of a little bit alert or sensitive to how people are and making this part of my agenda. That sounds a little bit odd, but I had to learn this to really take care of, is everybody good? Okay, there's one person and she doesn't say a lot in the team meeting normally. Maybe I should ask her more often. Maybe she just doesn't dare to speak up between all the read inspiring talkers in the team. So this kind of sensitivity I had to embed into my life, because there were some things. And thankfully, in this team of trust where I started my leadership skill training for myself, my personal journey, there were people who trusted me enough to tell me things like that. So I was in a lucky moment where people gave me this feedback, like, hey, have you realized that a person doesn't really speak up in the meetings, but I think she has great things to say. Maybe we should all as a team encourage her to speak up more, things like that.
Yeah.
And that helped me to understand, like, there is such a big variety in emotions in a team. They might be super different from mine. Yeah.
And it's so easy to assume that people process or perceive things the way you do. I've definitely been there before, where like something's no big deal for me, but you've completely underestimated what it could mean to somebody else. And I also like what you said about putting it on your agenda. I think there is just no shame in being like super clear with yourself to check in on people's like vibe, do a vibe check, do an emotional check, you know, and just actually see and make notes, because with a big team, you really need to.
Yeah.
And this also links a bit back to authenticity, because in the end, being authentic means something different for me than for somebody else. For me, it might be, I don't know, it might need courage to show my vulnerability, to be my authentic self. But for others, this might be absolutely not authentic to be vulnerable. They might hold back their opinions and feelings and act fully professional, because this is how they are and how they want to be. And this is also a difference in this authenticity, difficult word, that I had to understand, and also then to find my way to deal with these people and also understand how I can make them happy and growing.
Yeah, but that also comes back to what you're saying about strengths, because for some people, their strength might be indeed being super calm and cool and collected, and that is them being authentic. And for you, it could be being like really open with your emotions, and for you, that's being authentic. Anyway, we need to move on to our final statement. We could just keep going all day. Inauthentic leadership is a culture killer.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you've seen this. You've seen this.
Yes, I've experienced it myself as a leader in the manufacturing industry, and I've also seen it now in my work with teams and organizations. I think yes, because it comes down to everything we just talked about. When I'm authentic and use my emotional intelligence and my empathy to lead, then I can build this safe environment that we were talking about. If I'm just about, and if I'm not genuinely interested in the human beings that I'm working with, and I'm just interested in my own success, then, I will lose the trust, and the culture will, it will create a bad culture and a bad environment. And at the same time, if I don't create this safe environment, like psychological safety, we talked about it, where I can allow everyone to show up as themselves, to admit mistakes, to show up with things that are unsecure about, to ask questions. If I don't create that environment, then you won't have any innovation, creativity, lots of things will be blocked. You won't have a positive failure culture. And so I think it's all intertwined in you showing up as your authentic self, but most importantly, really being interested in the people and creating the safe environment through your authenticity. But I think it's about I want to create a safe culture, a safe environment.
I think if you have inauthentic leadership, you will definitely get to a more boring way of working, or a boring team, because then everybody will wear kind of a mask, a professional mask, and they will follow what you've just created, but you will lose all the variety and diversity that you can have in companies that lead to creativity, new ideas, fun. And then I think it really feels like it's work and life. But if you want to have a work-life balance and blend it in and make work feel like part of your life and your passion, I think then it's really necessary that people can be authentic, be themselves, bring all their ideas, their failures, their learnings to really also move forward. Because I do think that those inauthentic-led cultures, they don't move that fast, because nobody would dare to bring an idea, an innovation, or try to do something different. So they will go on in their grayish way of doing it.
Life.
Yes,
And it's driven by fear then, right?
Yeah.
In those organizations,
Yeah.
everything is driven by fear, and we pretend we've got it all figured out because we're scared of being really seen. And yeah.
What you said earlier was also just about actually having a genuine interest in people. And I find that is the key. And also what you've just said, people are so interesting when you actually get to know them. And someone who's just taken over a new team of 5 people, it was extremely daunting to walk into a team. I don't know them, they don't know me. And I was like, what am I going to do here? And the first thing I thought is, I need to spend time getting to know them. And that's the end of it. That is my only job right now. And it has been fascinating. People are so interesting and they're not what you thought they would be. And just like you said, the second you can really tap into these individuals, the team just becomes so much more interesting. I just feel very sad for people that are in these industries that are, like you said, just there, following this very traditional style.
But it also requires some trust from you then, because you have to trust that they will do their job while you get to know them. But the good thing is they have done the job already before, so you can trust. And I think this is also a good thing to go first as a leader in bringing in the trust to them, and then you will also get this back.
I think one really interesting thing about that is also that, as humans, our brain is kind of wired to keep us safe, right? So if we step in a new environment, like a new team, we quickly scan the environment, we scan the people, we scan our employees, and we kind of use judgment very quickly, even if we don't want to. It's like the first kind of instances. So it's quite natural because our brain wants to keep us safe. So we look at the people and we kind of have made our first judgments about them. So one thing that I tell leaders often to keep in mind is like, instead of judgment, use curiosity.
Yeah.
And that reframes it. It's like, I wonder why they're acting this way. It looks like they're a bit like they don't want to talk to me, or they're in a bit bad mood, or that they're critical of me or my work. It's like, I wonder why. And that opens up whole different conversations, because you will often find that people don't act out of a bad, because they have bad intentions or anything. There's lots of facets to people and reasons why they act in a way that they do. So less judgment, more curiosity, I think, can sometimes help ourselves to trick our brain into being more open and staying open to getting to know the people.
And it's just a softer approach. I love that approach myself. In fact, I think I said it in my wedding vows to my husband. I will approach conflicts with curiosity, because what it does is it changes things to giving them benefit of the doubt as well. And and it changes your tone of voice, it changes your body language. And then you're like, okay, what actually happened here? And I think that links to psychological safety. And then here we go. The authentic leadership wheel just keeps turning.
Beautiful.
Well, beautiful, absolutely. I think we're about wrapped up here. To end off, I would like both of you to each give sort of your one key takeaway that you want to give to our listeners regarding how to learn to be this authentic leader. I'm going to start with you, Anne.
So I'm going to repeat myself, but I think it's really important to drive home. I think it's really focusing on your strength, understand who you are, what you naturally do well, and then trust that that is good enough to show up as yourself, and just start and try it out. And you will see that it'll get easier. The more you show up as yourself, the more confirmation you will get that it's actually working. And then you can continue to grow into that authentic leadership brand.
Love it. Play to strengths. Chrissy, what's it for you?
To one only. I'd say be brave and trust your feeling.
Love it. Build that intuition. Beautiful. Very to the point. And I'd like to add one of my own. And I think that comes from that copycat thing that you were mentioning. Don't just think that the leadership styles you're seeing around you are the only options available to you. And for learning and development professionals, I would suggest really maybe do a bit of awareness for new leaders and say, here's a toolbox. You can pick any number of tools. That's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Moving Forward. If you've learned something new today, please share this episode with a colleague or a friend. And while you're at it, give us a review. This helps others find our podcast and help them move their people forward too. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.